apologetics and reasons why we think Christianity is true. I'm going to start with a prayer, and then we're going to talk about the argument from fine-tuning tonight. Father in heaven, God, we thank you so much for this time, Lord, to look at, to think about the universe, think about the way you have made it, so that we can know about you, know that you're there, know what you're like, that you love us and you want nothing but good for us, God. Pray that you'll be with us tonight and help us to understand all this and to give you glory for it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so I'm talking about the argument from fine-tuning tonight. This is really going to supplement what Dr. DePoe talked about last week. If you weren't here, he was talking about how when we look out in nature and we see beauty and all these other things, it's evidence that supports the idea that God exists. Well, tonight I was going to talk about this amazing thing that physicists have learned about our universe and how it points to the fact that God exists. Before I do, I wanted to start with some scripture, though. I'm sure y'all are familiar with this passage. It's from Romans 1, and the Apostle Paul says, "For God's invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without an excuse." So Paul, right, is teaching us that when you look out in the world, God made it such that when you look at it, you can tell that God exists. It teaches you about what God is like. And apparently the message is so strong that we're held accountable if we don't give God glory for that. The message is so strong. So I just think that is wonderful, and I wanted to come back to that at the end of this presentation and just talk about how we can think about what Christianity is telling us, what we think the world should be like, assuming that Christianity is true. But yeah, so it's a weird title, The Argument from Fine-Tuning. It's an argument for God's existence. So what I'm showing y'all tonight are reasons to believe that God exists. Now, before I was going to show you the argument here in a second, but before we do, we'd just like to be clear on what we mean by fine-tuning. Andy was saying that it made him think of tuning an instrument. To be honest, it made me think of like tuning a car. So we're not talking about thinking that God exists because of your car. Probably when we think about our cars, we get more angry than anything. But anyways, we need to define what fine-tuning is, okay? When we say the universe is finely tuned, we are talking about, it's a statement about these, what they call cosmological constants, okay? And you see a technical definition of it there that I've taken from a book titled Reasonable Faith. It's by a philosopher named William Lane Craig. He defines fine-tuning as small deviations from the actual values and quantities of the constants of the physical laws of nature would render the universe life-prohibiting. Okay, in my apologetics class at Kingdom Preparatory Academy, we use this textbook. It's called Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groothuis. And he defines it this way. I like the way he says it. It's a little bit more simple. He says, "This means that many aspects of the universe are closely calibrated and make human life possible." Okay? So when we say the universe is fine-tuned for life, all we're saying is that there are several cosmological constants that are set at the just right level so that if they were a little bit lower or a little bit higher, none of us would be here today. We either would have just never have been born or we would all die. It's kind of scary, right? When you think about the laws of nature that scientists have studied and discovered, right? We talk about, I actually have it on the next couple slides. There's several fundamental forces of nature, right? There's electromagnetism, there's gravity, the weak force, the strong force, okay? On my slide up here, I have an example of an equation for one of the laws of nature. This is Newton's law of gravity. Okay, and you see that weird-looking equation up there that starts with F? equals G and all the rest of that. So this is a mathematical statement of Newton's law of gravity. And you see up there, F stands for the magnitude of the attractive force. So this is us trying to figure out how much attractive force is between two objects, right? In our equation, G equals the gravitational constant. Those M's are the masses of two objects that you're studying, and the R is the distance between two objects. So what you do is you try to figure out that distance, you figure out the mass of the objects, and what you're going to do is, though, so do you see in this equation, G is the gravitational constant, okay? That is just some number. If you're trying to figure out the attractive force between two objects, you have to do some observation, right? You have to figure out the mass of the objects, the distance between them. But you're not going to try to look for something to figure out what G is. You just know that's a number that you put into the equation, okay? And the gravitational constant is one of these constants that I'm talking about. So there's nothing about the laws of nature. There's nothing that we know of in the universe that determines what the gravitational constant is. And there's a constant that comes along with all of these fundamental forces. So there's a constant involved with the electromagnetism. I just showed you the gravity constant. There's a constant for the weak force and the strong force, okay? And these are just at the right levels for us to be alive. Talking about gravity, for instance, there's a physicist named Paul Davies who has talked about how if the gravitational constant was just a little bit higher or just a little bit lower, we wouldn't be here right now. I think, let's see, what they were saying is that if the gravitational force, the gravitational constant, was higher or lower by a magnitude of 0.0001, we wouldn't be here right now. I mean, obviously we know gravity is important for us to be alive. Not only, scientists talk about the formulation of planets and elements and all that stuff. That's what they're mainly talking about. But right here, right now, like, we need gravity to be in force, right? Because if it was too less, all the oxygen would jettison into space, and it wouldn't be a fun time. If it was too much, we'd all be crunched on the ground or fly into the sun or something like that, right? So we need gravity to be at this just right level at all moments for us to be here. And that's what they're saying, is that if any of these forces, and I'm not a scientist, but I know the weak and the strong force, these are like the forces that are responsible for even our molecules to be together. So if these change, things aren't going to go very well. And what they're saying is, you can just think about all the different values that these constants could be, and it's just, at least from a naturalistic standpoint, scientists looking at these, they're like, and it's more than just these four fundamental forces. There's all sorts of other variables with constants that we know of that make this even more striking. So, like the amount of mass in the universe, the density of the universe, the rate of the expansion of the universe, all these things are at these just right levels for life to exist, and not only life, but also intelligent life, more advanced life. Okay, so that's what I mean when we say the universe is finely tuned. And this actually is not controversial in science. This isn't something that we're making up just to argue that God exists, okay? This is just a concept that we're taking from the science textbooks. It's something they've discovered over the last few decades. So we're taking this concept of the fine-tuning of the universe, and we're going to use this to turn it into an argument for God's existence. So, right, when I say argument, I just mean given reasons for a conclusion. So here's our argument. Our first premise is the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Second premise is it is not due to physical necessity or chance, so therefore we conclude it is due to design. Now, it doesn't say God anywhere in it, but if you can imagine, right, when we conclude that the universe, that the fine-tuning of the universe is due to the design, we're saying that the constants are at these just right levels at all moments in time because of something outside the universe, and we're concluding that it is an intelligent, all-powerful being, which we call God, right? Well, what I was going to do tonight is walk you through these premises. I was going to show you how we defend 1 and 2, and then just talk about the conclusion a little bit, talk about some objections people have made to this argument, and then I wanted to tie it all back into what Paul said in Romans. All right? So let's talk about these. Right, when you give an argument, you need to defend the truth of the premises, right? So we've just lined up this argument for God's existence. We talk about premise number one: the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. This one's actually pretty easy to defend because all we're saying in this one is there seem to be just three options, right? Because we're talking about the fine-tuning of the universe, and we're saying that this is either explained by physical necessity, and when we say that, I mean that maybe we've learned something that shows that that's just how the universe has to be. There's only one way it could have been. Chance was just saying that the fine-tuning is due to luck, right? Or design, and that's where we're saying that there's some intelligent force beyond the universe making it happen. All right? So what we're saying here is that there's three options. So if someone wants to say that, if someone wants to object to premise one, you just say, well, I think there's another option, or I don't think these three options are good, something like that. But pretty much I would say that this seems to exhaust our options, right? I don't know if y'all can think of a fourth option, let me know. But that's what we're saying. All right. Now, but what we do to defend premise two is that we just say the reasons why we don't think it's due to physical necessity or chance. Our first one is physical necessity. Honestly, this is the least controversial because I just told y'all, right? The fine-tuning of the universe is something that cosmologists, physicists have just known about. They know that these constants, there's many of them, and they're at these just right levels for life to exist. So that's not really controversial. But just one more time, what we're saying is there's nothing in the laws of nature that they've discovered. There's nothing about the equations or anything that tell us what amount or what number the constant is going to be. We've just discovered what the number is, and that just so happens to be in the parameters for life. Okay, so we don't know of anything that would tell us that these have to be like that. There's nothing about the universe that tells us that it must exist. We must have these laws of nature, and they must have these constants for life. Okay, now in this debate, some people have mentioned that maybe, and if you are more science-minded, maybe you'll know what I'm talking about. Some people have suggested, well, maybe we're going to come up with some theory of everything, and it's going to tell us why the laws are the way they are and why the constants are at those levels. It'll explain it. We just need to wait a little bit longer. Well, I wanted to say a few words about theories of everything. So one thing to know, if you ever hear the term theory of everything, these actually, it's a bit of a misnomer, kind of like the Big Bang. It confuses people more than anything. A theory of everything is actually these theories where they're just, so I just showed you that slide with the fundamental forces of nature: weak force, strong force, gravity, electromagnetism. Theories of everything are just trying to unify the forces such that we come up with some theory that shows how all the forces are explainable in terms of just one unified force. Okay, so a theory of everything doesn't mean that it's going to explain every single little thing, tell you why you slept in the other day or tell you why your jokes aren't funny. It's just, a theory of everything is just trying to unite all of scientific explanation, basically, in terms of one force and one particle, okay? Now, the closest thing we've gotten to a theory of everything, if you've ever heard of this, is string theory. And now, thing about string theory, though, is I remember I read a book about string theory one time written by a scientist aimed at a popular audience. I don't know how much of it I understood, but string theory talks about how it's called string theory because it postulates the fundamental particle is like this one-dimensional particle. It's like they call it a string. It's not even 2 dimensions, so it gets really weird. But it also theorizes that there's 11 dimensions and all sorts of stuff like that. Now, so if they could make some observations that would confirm everything they've been thinking about with string theory, okay? The issue, though, is if this is an objection to the idea that the fine-tuning of the universe is not by physical necessity, there's issues with that, okay? string theory, first of all, it doesn't explain, it could unify everything under one force, but even given that, it doesn't explain why we have this particular universe. Let me show you a quote. I don't know if y'all are going to be able to even see that, but let me show you this quote I have from the late Stephen Hawking. Okay, he was talking about string theory and its power to explain things in 2003, and this is a quote he gave at a conference. He said, "Even when we understand the ultimate theory, it won't tell us much about how the universe began. It cannot predict the dimensions of space-time, the gauge group, or other parameters of the low-energy effective theory. It won't determine how this energy divided between conventional matter and a cosmological constant or quintessence." So to come back to the question, does string theory predict the state of the universe? The answer is that it does not. It allows a vast landscape of possible universes in which we occupy an anthropically permitted location. So what they know about string theory is that it might unify all the forces under one force, but that's still not going to fix any issues with it being striking that the universe is life permitting. Okay, I've read that string theory allows, and if we were in my classroom, I'd write this up on the board so y'all could see it. But I've read that string theory allows for, given our laws of nature, it allows for 10 to the 500th power possible universes. So, and only a very small fraction of those are life permitting. So even if we come up with string theory, it's a theory of everything, it's not going to explain why the universe is the way it is. It's not going to explain away the fine-tuning, okay? It's really not going to teach us or show us why the constants are the way they are, okay? So anyways, that was kind of took a while just to say, we don't believe the constants are at these levels because they have to be that way. There's nothing about the universe that tells us that, okay? So that's our first one that we're eliminating. We don't think the fine-tuning is due to physical necessity. Now, this next one that I'm going to argue against is that the fine-tuning is not due to chance. We don't think, given the number of possible universes, just looking at the constants and imagining all the different universes we could have had, when we look at all the possible universes that could have arose if all this was by chance, what we're going to say is that the probability of having a life-permitting universe is practically impossible, given a one-off scenario, okay? What I like to use whenever I'm talking about this is a concept called specified complexity. I just gave you basically the reason why we don't think it was by chance, and we're just saying that given all the possible universes, the great number that aren't life-permitting and the small number that are life-permitting, we think it's beyond impossible for the universe to be life-permitting. But I do like to talk about this concept called specified complexity. It was formulated by a intelligent design theorist named William Dembski. And it's just a really great way to be very clear on what you mean when you are making what he calls a design inference, okay? So what we do is, when we're trying to look for design in nature, and William Dembski will say that we're not just, wearing tinfoil hats here. Like, people in science do search for design in nature all the time, right? Like the SETI program that looks for patterns, listening for radio frequencies, looking for maybe messages from another planet. Searching for design in nature is not just something that wacky creationists do, right? Well, anyways, when we're looking for patterns and looking to see if things in nature can't be explained by chance, we run them through what he calls the design filter. And if you say yes to all three questions when you're looking at some phenomena in nature or some system in nature, then you can infer that system is exhibiting specified complexity, and you can infer that it was designed, okay? So, but you see those three questions there, and what I was going to do is I was going to take these three questions and ask these about our universe, thinking about the fine-tuning, right? So you ask yourself, is the natural system contingent? Is the natural system complex? And is it specific, okay? So just to be real clear really quickly, right, when you're asking if a natural system is contingent, you're actually asking something similar to what we just looked at. When you ask, is it contingent, you're saying, is there something about the laws of nature or about physical reality that tells us that this system just has to exist in the way it does, okay? If the answer is no, then the system is contingent, okay? Is the natural system complex, right? Is it made up of many different parts? Is basically all you're asking there. And is the natural system specific? The specific question is a little bit hard to capture, so I have an example for y'all. So I'd like to use this example when we're talking about this. Yeah, speaking about our cars and having fun, let's imagine that we're all going to head to the DMV, okay? And let's say that our name is Tom, and we were born on September 1st, 2004. Okay, now I have a slide, but we had a little bit of hiccup with the slide. It's going to show a license plate number, but it's all jumbled up. So, but anyways, if y'all will just bear with me. So imagine, so our name is Tom. We were born on September 1st, 2004, and we're just going to go to the DMV, get our vehicle registered, and get a license plate. Right, and we know there's many different possible combinations you could get on your license plate, right? They just give you random letters, they give you random numbers. Who knows how many possible license plate numbers there are. So, but unless you like pay more money and specifically tell them what to put on it, you're just not expecting any particular license plate, right? But let's imagine we go to the DMV and our license plate, so it's all jumbled up, but imagine your license plate says TOM 9104. Would you just, your name is Tom, you're born on September 1st, would you just be like, I mean, that's a coincidence. That's funny. My name's Tom and I was born on this date. Would you just walk out of the DMV and not think anything else of it? Or would you just be amazed and think, wait a minute, do I have like a college buddy working behind the counter? Or like, what's going on? Someone's messing with me. Like, there's no, out of all the letters and numbers this license plate could have had, this one says my name and birthday on it, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about is the system specific? So, one thing they think shows specified complexity is DNA, because DNA actually is a code for all the different ways that humans can exist, and all of our physical traits. But what I'm saying, what I'm telling y'all is that I think that when you think about the universe, when you think about the fine-tuning of these constants, it really does seem to be beyond chance, something that couldn't have just happened by randomly, right? So when let's take this design filter and ask all these questions about the universe and the fine-tuning. So is the system contingent? We need to be focusing on the fine-tuning, but right, we would say that the universe is contingent. The fine-tuning is contingent. Scientists will tell you that there's nothing about our physical reality that seems to tell us that this just has to be here, and we already know that the fine-tuning itself is contingent, right? Those numbers don't need to be at the right levels for life; they just are that way. Okay, so we would say that the universe and the fine-tuning of the universe is contingent. Is the universe complex? Certainly, right? And when we think about the fine-tuning, is that complex? Are there just two options for what the constants could be, or are there many options? And the constants of these fundamental forces, it's a number. It could be any different numbers, but they're just at these right levels for life. So the question of the fine-tuning this is a complex system. The universe is obviously very complex, and there's many options, many different universes that could exist, but we have this one. And is it specific, right? We would say yes, because when you think about all the different possible universes, I probably should have talked about this sooner, but I don't know how this works, but I've read that someone worked on this, and they actually they think that right. So when we talk about this, we're just assuming that all the laws of nature are the same, but they're just going to try to figure out how many universes they think could exist in all the different with different constants, right? And someone calculated that the number of possible thinking about all the possible non-life permitting universes and the small number of life permitting universes, right? In a one-off scenario, given the probability of getting a life permitting universe, given the vast number of universes that aren't life permitting, this would be the equivalent of entering a lottery where you get a ticket that has one number on it. And what happens is they have a machine, okay, and each it has all these balls in it, and each ball has one number on it. Well, in the machine there will be a pool of 1 billion balls. And if you're going to win the lottery, it's because your one number, your one ball in that billion pool falls down. So the example I read was it was one white ball in a pool of black balls, and it's just one white ball in a pool of billion. But yeah, so what we're saying is given the number of possible universes that are all that won't allow for life, there's the number of universes that do allow for life is so small. It's like that one ball in a pool of 1 billion balls. Another way I've heard people talk about it is, usually we talk about it in the college classroom where I have the whiteboard behind me, but you could imagine like this panel right here where the cross is. If I took a marker and I just put one mark, a small circle about the size of your thumb, that would be the range of universes. And the rest of this panel would be all the universes that aren't life permitting. The spot that I would put on there would be the one place where it would be the range of universes that are life permitting. That's how small this is. So you can imagine if I walk into the DMV and it says Tom 9104, and I'm sitting there going, what's going on? There must be an explanation to this. This is what we're saying. The probability of our universe, by chance, having these constants that allow for life is so small that it's practically impossible, given a one-off scenario. Okay, so we're arguing that the fine-tuning is not due to chance. It's not due to physical necessity. So the last option we're dealing with is by design, right? And when you think about it, these constants, there's nothing in nature that are determining what they are. So what we are concluding is that the explanation for the design of the constants, for the just right levels for life at every moment that we exist, must be due to something beyond the universe that has this design in mind and is powerful enough to make it happen. And I'm arguing that could only be God. All right, so that's our conclusion. We're just looking at the fine-tuning that scientists have discovered, and then we're saying, hey, I love thinking about this, especially with everything that Dr. DePoe talked about last week, because he was talking about all of these mathematical patterns that really show you in a certain way, describe why nature is so beautiful. And it was just really amazing. But this is another thing that we're realizing, that when you look at the math of it all, it really is pointing to God's existence. Now, I wanted to talk about what Paul was saying in Romans here in a second, but before I do, really quickly, I wanted to just talk about a couple objections that people bring, especially to the chance part of our argument, okay? And these are kind of fun to talk about because the answer to them is kind of, I don't know, I think it's fun to think about. So now, one objection that people have talked about, you see it up on there on the slide, they say, well, we thought that the probability of a life-permitting universe is low, but we're here talking about this. So maybe it's not so, maybe it's not so improbable after all. An example I've heard someone give is that, there's someone who's goes up to the firing squad because they got in trouble with the law back in back in the day, and they blindfold them. They say, they give the command to fire, and everybody in the firing squad fires, and then the person with the blindfold on is just sitting there, and they touch themselves. I'm alive. I'm not even injured. And they say, well, man, that seems kind of crazy, but like, if I wasn't here to talk about this, then, I'm here to talk about it, so that as improbable as it seems, maybe it was meant to be. Maybe it was destiny, And that's kind of what this objection is saying, is that we think the probability is low, but the only reason why we think that is because we're here. So what's the big deal? Okay? Maybe there's something we're going to discover, but we're here and we're talking about this, so if you think about it, the probability is 1, because the universe does have life in it, okay? And if you were ever to talk about this, or you ever heard someone say that, you can go, there's a couple things to think about. One is that, yes, we are here, okay? But it's not fair to say that makes it the probability of us being here just 1, right? To be clear, what we're saying is, the reason why we're saying the probability is so low is because we know the universe could have been in all these other billions of ways, but it's not. It's in the constants of the laws of nature at these just right levels, in this really small probability area, looking at the area where all the universes could have been. So let's say that you do enter that lottery, and you have your number, and there's a billion balls, and the number drops, and you didn't win, but someone did win. And that person, if they said, well, the probability was pretty low, but look, I won, so it must have been destiny. Someone had to win. Someone was going to win. That's kind of what this objection is saying. But imagine if the person who won was the person who runs the lottery. Let's say it's his son. Now that is the specified complexity we're talking about. So, right, the amount of balls, the amount of numbers that could have been dropped, it just so happens that the lottery owner's son wins. And, unless you're a fool, that should mean something to you, right? Something's going on here. Yes, someone had to win, and yes, it would be a very amazing coincidence that his son did it, but the probability of his son in a one-off scenario winning is so low that you would have to start asking questions, right? And that's what we're talking about. We're not saying, right, the low amount of universes that are life permitting, those universes mean something. It's not just a random pool of universes in any different universe. No, there's a small range of universes that are life permitting. There's a giant number of universes that aren't. And when we see in a one-off scenario that those small numbers that are so improbable that it's beyond impossibility get picked, now we're asking, this doesn't look like chance to us, okay? And I would say that's at least reasonable to conclude. So if someone says that, just remind them, if someone were to tell me that, I would say, well, yes, one of the universes had to get picked if we're just doing this by chance, but the probability of being life permitting is so low, and it's so meaningful that it cries out for design. Especially if you've been watching Marvel movies lately, this is kind of fun to think about. Now, scientists seeing this fine-tuning of the universe have actually tried to explain it. And, I don't want to say that scientists are all these really mean atheist types or anything. As professional scientists, they're trying to explain things they see in nature simply through natural means, right? So they're not necessarily trying to get around God when they do this. But there have been some scientists who've said, well, maybe we can explain the fine-tuning. From their perspective, they're thinking how improbable it is, not just for these constants to be at those levels, but also, just thinking about, they talk about the Big Bang and the whole universe starting from a singularity, and then all this matter shooting out in all these random directions, and we just so happen to be here. It's to them, it just seems really amazing. Well, one thing that they have thought about is that, so their explanation is, maybe the reason why, maybe we shouldn't be surprised to see the constants be fine-tuned, because maybe we live in a multiverse in which there is an infinite number of universes. And so when we look out in our universe and we see it fine-tuned for life, there's nothing surprising about that, because given an infinite number of universes, one of them's bound to be fine-tuned for life. So we shouldn't be surprised. Okay? So I wanted to say a few words about this one. All right? First and foremost, by the way, this is really just something that they've thought of to speculate about how they explain the fine-tuning. There is no evidence for this. But there's some interesting things that scientists have learned about the multiverse theories. So one that I've read about is that some scientists are arguing that the only plausible models for a multiverse, you know what I'm saying? So like they run all the numbers to see if this would actually work with what we see in reality. Supposedly the only plausible models, multiverse models, are models that have a beginning in time. So the interesting thing about that is that would tell you that if the multiverse theory idea is correct, it means that there actually couldn't be an infinite number of universes that exist, because if there had to be a beginning to time, even in a multiverse, that means that in any given time there will only be a finite number of universes. So honestly, I would say that doesn't even get around the problem, because you're still dealing with a finite number of universes, and it would still be amazing that ours is fine-tuned. I think one of, besides that, so what we're saying is there's no evidence for this. Saying that God did it, I would argue, is a simpler explanation and a rational explanation. An interesting thing about this multiverse theory is that it proves too much, I would argue, right? They're trying to explain the fine-tuning, but if you've had young kids or a nephew or a niece or something like that, right, and they come up to you and start, by the way, yeah, if you have an annoying niece or nephew or somebody who asks you questions all the time, you can use this. So imagine someone comes to you and says, "Why is the sky blue?" You say, "Well, we live in a multiverse with an infinite number of universes, and we just so happen to live in the universe with a blue sky." Why did the dinosaurs go extinct? Well, we live in a multiverse with an infinite number of worlds, and we just so happen to live in the one where dinosaurs lived and went extinct. Do you see how this would, in a certain sense of the word, it does explain it, but it doesn't really explain it. It more like explains it away without actually telling you why it's the case. Given all the different configurations, it still is amazing that all of the knobs are set at the just right levels for us to be here. So even if someone, again, there's no other reason besides trying to explain fine-tuning to say that there's a multiverse. Well, there might be other reasons, but there's no tangible evidence that these exist. But also, I would say they explain too much. Even if you ask, well, why is multiverse theory true? You say, well, we live in the universe where multiverse theory is true. So, but anyways, those are the objections. I don't have a slide for this, but I wanted to bring this back to, let's see. Oh, yeah, no, I messed up. I don't have a slide for this, but I wanted to bring this back to what Paul was saying. If you know someone who's very science-minded, and maybe they're a skeptic, or maybe they're searching for answers, or maybe it's just someone that you sit down with and talk with, and they're a little asking questions or always poking jabs. Science-minded people like theories, and they like to talk in terms of explanatory power. And this is something that I've noticed over the years, trying to think in terms like this. Paul told us, I showed y'all on our slide, Romans 1:20, right? That God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen since the creation of the world. When you read through the Bible, you learn that, right, God created the world. The heavens declare the glory of God. God created human beings to know and to love him, and he created creation to glorify himself, right? And what we do with that in theology is that we realize that God, the reason why we think he created is to share his love with other beings, right? Because he's perfect, he doesn't need anything. Did he need to create? He didn't need to create. But being an infinitely loving being, he wanted to share his love and goodness with other beings. So the more I thought about it, the more I thought, Christianity actually gives us a theory, gives us a prediction. And the prediction is, and I don't, probably won't ever be any way to confirm this, but the prediction is that any universe that exists is going to have rational beings in it with an intellect and a will. It's going to have advanced life, beings who can know and love God back. When you think about what naturalism, atheism predict, they don't predict anything. They don't have any predictive power. They don't predict any universe. It could have been anything. So, if you ever hear someone say, well, this is exactly the kind of universe we'd expect given the blind, random natural processes, well, you can say, well, hold on now. This actually, any universe that you would see would be a universe that you would expect if it's ran by blind, random natural processes. This universe we have, though, has intelligent life in it. And that's actually predicted by Christianity because God creates us so we can know and love him and live with him forever. So, kind of have one up on explanatory power on the atheists there, and you can use this concept, talk about Paul, and then maybe transition into the gospel after that. But yeah, that's the argument for fine tuning. So if y'all have any questions, I'd love to talk about it.
Yes, we have some microphones down here. Let's give Dr. Keltz a round of applause. Now, he really did stretch our minds. So you may have heard some terms you haven't heard before. Constants, fine-tuning, strong forces, nuclear forces, weak nuclear forces. Does anybody need to hear those terms explained again, or do you have any particular questions that you want to ask Dr. Keltz? While you're thinking, I do have an illustration for you to think about, and correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Keltz talked about knobs, and one way I've heard fine-tuning is if you have a radio, you tune a radio very delicately to get a station. Well, what happens if you had 3 knobs that you had to tune in just the right way to get a station? That would be comparable to these constants. Well, what if you had a line of dials that, let's say, went down 1 million, and every dial had to be perfectly tuned in order to get the radio station that you wanted? Is that an apt illustration?
Oh yeah, that's a great illustration.
And you could say, oh, just by coincidence, all of the dials are tuned to the radio station that I like. You think, oh, someone got there ahead of time and tuned all the stations, all of the little knobs for me. This is very abstract. You did a very nice job explaining it. I've heard these things before, and they're still a stretch for me. So in the time I just took to explain that, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Keltz? I've got 2 mics right here.
You just made me think of The Price is Right. but there'd be like 20 different wheels, and you'd have to spin them all at the same time and get a certain combination.
I think that's the making of a new illustration. Oh, I've got to unmute it. Pardon me. I thought I unmuted it.
The wheels would have to have a lot more numbers on them, though.
Go ahead.
All right. I wanted to ask about the ways in which it looks like there are things in nature that appear to be, if you will, finely tuned to do like bad things, as people might say. So there's like animals, like I believe it's a cowbird here in West Texas that will lay its eggs in another bird's nest, and that cowbird chick will hatch first, knock out all the other eggs, and make another bird raise it. That just seems kind of like bad, right? That critter in nature has been designed this way. There's other things where there are creatures that propagate by like planting their eggs in like another creature's like eyeball and some other gritty things like this. Some would say, don't these things count against this kind of designer you're pointing to?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. That's. Well, I always, so I've studied the problem of evil, by the way, for years, and I always end up saying things like, well, it's really fun to talk about, or it's really fun to think about. And I wonder how many people think I'm crazy, but, thinking about parasites probably sounds really morbid, but it is fascinating. So, and Darwin has a famous quote, right? He talks about the devil's chaplain, and the Ichneumonidae bearing its eggs and others. And he had issues with the problem of evil. Charles Darwin did. I don't want to psychoanalyze him, but he did lose a child, and he had some issues with Christianity because of evil and his looking into nature. But, so some things in nature don't seem to be very nice, right? And things like that seem kind of terrible. Why would God design these insects that plant their eggs in other insects and parasites and things like that? But it is pretty interesting to me when you study, when you look into the findings of ecology, it usually does look like those kinds of animals are a part of an ecosystem, and they actually do contribute to the well-being of the ecosystem as a whole. I actually studied that specifically at a certain point because I was looking into insects and how they contribute to the environment. And, there's actually, I just like to tell people about this because I don't know how many people know, but, they call them parasitoids. They're the insects that plant their eggs in other insects, and then it grows up inside of it. That's actually what inspired the movie Aliens, by the way. But there's something called hyperparasitoids. They're these insects that plant their eggs inside the eggs that get planted in the insects. But anyways, those really do seem to provide ecological benefits. So a lot of times, whether it's animal predation, animals eating other animals, or parasites and other things, they do discover that, for example, as terrible as it might sound, a lot of times the parasites or the predators, they only feed on the weak, really. It's actually amazing, something that they've seen. Because y'all know the predators are going to go after the slow ones, the sick ones. And what happens is it actually reduces suffering in the animal kingdom as a whole, but also whenever the weak and the sick die off, that oftentimes makes the populations healthier. If there's ever genetic disorders, those get ripped out pretty soon. I've even studied viruses. I know this has been on our minds since 2020, but without viruses, we don't think we would be here. Some people think that there's as many viruses in the ocean as there are pieces of sand on the beach. But viruses do so many amazing things. I think I talked about this in one of our lectures before, but it's things like I just said. Like if we didn't have viruses, I think bacteria would get out of control. There'd be so much bacteria would just consume the earth. Viruses actually play a part in creating in the rain cycle. If we didn't have viruses, they think the viruses play a part in seeding clouds so they actually get raindrops big enough to fall. I mean, a lot of these things that we think are terrible are actually beneficial. And yeah, insects planting things in other insects. Oh, I would also say that I don't think it's a very complex issue, but I don't think insects, definitely don't think they're self-aware, but some people even wonder if most insects are conscious. Maybe bees, because they fly so far away from their hives. But one point I'd just like to point out is that there's no one's, like when they, there's observations of like a bug, its back half is getting consumed by one bug and it's still eating its lunch, like we don't think they feel much. So it's not like you need to feel sorry for them as much, because they live a day or two, and we don't think they are conscious of that much. They're more like machines than anything. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I've studied this a lot, so don't ever ask anyone about what they studied for their dissertation. But yeah, things oftentimes that look terrible to us in nature turn out to be something that makes it possible for us to be here. And I would argue that parasitoids are one of them.
I had one more question, and that has to do with probability. Much of what you talked about here, some of what you talked about here raises the question of probability. And I've heard some people say, well, the universe is old enough and big enough to overcome any odds that would be against it. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, and I think, didn't we talk about this last week? I believe the answer is that that's just not correct. It's not just, that's one of the reasons why they have to invoke the multiverse theory, is because we haven't been here long enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think if someone said that, they would be arguing that, yeah, we've been around so long that so much must have been tried, so that now, well, here we are, But we really don't. I've never heard anyone say that they think that's true. I remember reading about this in other design argument areas, and it usually has to do with evolution. Assuming that evolution was true. What I've read is that even if evolution was true, all the mechanisms in place and that was really how the world was ran, they don't think there was enough time for us to have evolved. So scientists have to go and look for other mechanisms that they think might have triggered it.
See, you're making a point right there where someone would say, what do you mean there's no time for us to evolve? We did it. Now, you pointed that point out before, and I think I've heard atheists say that. What do you mean we don't have enough time to evolve? Here we are, we evolved, therefore atheism is true. Does anybody see the error in that thinking? I think that's very subtle and very tricky. I think that's why the church needs to raise its stakes when it comes to intellectual game. You got a question back there? Here
we go. It just seems like a lot of the counter arguments, whether people believe it's God or some other entity that's behind the scenes doing this design, how remarkable it really is. And you gave the example of the radio dials. Every single person has been fine-tuned, every single being, every single parasite, everything. And for me personally, I don't have to understand everything. There is an illogical side of this argument that I cannot explain, that people can't explain. I don't think we have to be able to explain it. There's a mystical side of this thing that is beyond our comprehension. And it's like when you use the billions of a billionth of the balls, that's a small number to God, perhaps. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around, but I think it's like he's not getting enough credit for how remarkable it really is. It's more detailed than I can fathom. And so if there's an argument or a debate that goes on with this, there's just, you get to a point where people can't explain it. And when you're trying to take something that's that big and that remarkable and explain it to a person and break it down and oversimplify it, it's really not something that you can debate, because if you believe it's beyond our comprehension. So it's not really a question, more of an observation on if there is a debate or an argument that goes on, there's a big part of it that I can't explain. So.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. This is a topic that really causes us to stretch our minds. There's no doubt about it. When you start to talk about God and talk about infinite improbabilities, it stretches our mind. It's good stuff to do. Any other questions at all? I'm going to respect our time. We're just a little over. I did not see any questions online. Any last closing comments?
No.
See, in this universe, we live in a universe where he has no closing comments. Is that right? Or not? Or do you have closing comments in this universe?
Your comment was just making me think more about what Paul says, Yeah, because you don't need, I'm definitely not, what we're not saying is that you need to be a physicist to know that God exists, right? Like you can just, Paul's saying, this is in the, right? This is in ancient times, and he's saying that since creation, people have known that God exists and his divine nature and power, and he deserves glory for that. And then it makes, it does make me think of the way he set up nature, and it really does kind of have I don't know, yeah, maybe just like a closing thought. I've thought about, thinking about the way they say the universe, they think it did have a beginning. They talk about how it will die one day, so maybe there will be no energy left. They call it heat death. So when you look at the cosmos as a whole, it seems like it had a beginning, but it's going to die, and there's no way around that. And then when you look at nature and you see, the light and day cycles, but you see the seasons and you see life coming from death. And I really do think that God built the gospel into nature. We see the cycles, we see life coming from death, we see animals, blood being shed so they can live. And in a certain respect, I really do think that nature is preaching us the gospel all the time. And we don't have to be scientists to understand that. So.
Well, thank you for those thoughts. And we do live in a universe where we have some cookies and coffee out there. So let's give Dr. Kyle another round of applause. And thank you for coming tonight. And remember, we have 2 more lectures coming in July and music camp coming up. And tell your grandkids and kids about that. Thanks for being here.
I was going to pull it up on the phone, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't want to mess it up. There it is.